thank you for the debate tonight. It was fascinating. Ultimately, one of the questions in the press conference intrigued me. The chap who said, I read the God Delusion, loved every page of it, but I felt rather depressed at the end and that I should go to church. I mean, atheism, at its absolute level of the universe is all there is just molecules, chemistry, no purpose, no guidance, is terribly desolate in some sense. And is it any surprise that people maybe feel that it just is an awful kind of way of looking at the universe and that they don't want to believe it?
First, I don't accept that it's bleak and desolate. But even if it were, so what? Why shouldn't the universe be bleak and desolate? The universe doesn't owe us comfort, it doesn't owe us consolation, it doesn't owe us happiness. If something is true, then it's true. And no amount of prattling about it being bleak and uncomfortable will make it any different from that. If you've got cancer of the liver, then you've got cancer of the liver, and you can't make it not true by just saying, oh, that's a bleak and uncomfortable view.
What about the idea that presumably you love your wife? Now, you could reduce that to a Darwinian explanation of love and all the benefits that having that feeling gives us. But it's not very romantic if that's what you tell your wife when you go to bed.
I wouldn't use the word reduce, because by using the word reduce, you've automatically made it unromantic. Romantic is what you make it. I'm a human being, and so is she. I live in a human society, and so most of my life is lived in that human context. And I'm as romantic as anybody else.
I'm sure you are. But in a sense, what I'm getting at is that there is no thing out there that you would call love. There's no value that exists independently of us that is love. It's just something that has sprung up in the course of the purposeless course of evolution.
Exactly.
And
what?
Well, it doesn't sound like love when you put it like that, because that's not what people think of when they say love.
Once again, the universe doesn't owe you something that you think would be nice. If love exists, love has sprung out of brains which have evolved, and that's the way it is. And I think it's very nice, thank you. I mean, I'm capable of loving, I'm capable of romance, I enjoy music, poetry, everything else. It doesn't add anything to bring in something supernatural. It's just a total sloppy thinking to say that you can't understand romance, you can't understand poetry unless you drag the supernatural in.
What about ultimate, if you like, morality? Because I know that there wasn't as much time as I imagined there was going to be in the debate for that aspect, and many who are Christians and apologists, etc., would say ultimately, if there is no morality, as it were, given by God, then there is no compulsion on anyone to stop them going around doing whatever they like, because there's no ultimate moral.
Do you realise what abject contempt you're holding your fellow humans in when you say that? You're actually implying that the only reason we don't go around raping and pillaging and stealing is that we're frightened of God. I mean, what kind of a contemptible reason for being good is that?
That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, everyone feels that there is some kind of objective moral facts around that raping and killing and stealing is wrong. Now, that is true regardless of whether evolution has given us those, if you like, criteria to live by. It's true regardless of whether we have evolved in the way we evolved. It's as true as 1 + 1 = 2.
Oh, no, it's not. It's not as true as 1 + 1 = 2. What we're saying, and I think we're probably agreeing, is that there are certain universal moral principles which everybody has, regardless of their religion and whether they have a religion at all. Things like, actually, there's even been research on this, giving people rather standard moral questions, moral dilemmas, hypothetical ones, and asking which they think is the more moral course. And there's a wide measure of agreement among all humans in different tribes and everything. I see no problem with deriving that from our evolutionary origins. We all have noses, we all have eyes, we all have knees, and these have all evolved. We all have sexual desires because they've evolved. Why shouldn't we have this sense of what's moral? Things like the golden rule, things like do as you would be done by.
But if we had evolved into a society where rape was considered fine, would that mean that rape is fine?
I wouldn't. I don't want to answer that question. It's enough for me to say that we live in a society where it's not considered fine. We live in a society where selfishness, where failure to pay your debts, failure to reciprocate favours is regarded askance. That is the society in which we live. I'm very glad. That's a value judgment. I'm very glad that I live in such a society.
It is, but when you make a value judgment, don't you immediately step yourself outside of this evolutionary process and say there is the reason this is good is because it's good, and you don't have any way to stand on that statement.
But my value judgment itself could come from my evolutionary past, and I suppose.
So therefore, it's just as random in a sense as any product of evolution.
Well, you could say that. But it doesn't, in any case, nothing about it makes it more probable that there is anything supernatural.
Okay, but ultimately, your belief that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact that we've evolved 5 fingers rather than 6. I mean,
you could say that, yeah.
Just one more question on a more scientific aspect of this. You went over to a large degree the complexity of the universe, the fine-tuning at the point of the Big Bang and that sort of thing. And Lennox was keen to stress that God is the only viable explanation for that. You were keen to stress that, well, physics could have its own Darwinian revolution at some point down the line. God is not a satisfactory explanation because then you have to explain God. I mean, wouldn't a definition of God as being an uncaused cause do the job? Because otherwise we have a constant regress as a scientist. Whatever explanation you posit for beginning of the universe, there has to be an explanation for that and an explanation for that.
Well, that's fine, but then it's sheer hypocrisy to then say, oh, well, once you've accepted that, you might as well go the whole hog and have the virgin birth and the crucifixion. I mean, that really gets my goat.
Okay, but I understand that. Yeah. But in a sense, John might say, well, let's establish the God thing first, and then questions about how God reveals God's self. Yes. But I mean, going back to the original question,
if you want to define God as the singularity in physics that gave rise to the first fundamental particle or something like that, then that's playing with words, and I don't mind playing with words. I mean, you can define God, but I mean, that is quite clearly not the God that anybody actually believes in when they believe in forgiveness of sins and answering prayers.
No, obviously that's it's only one aspect of that God, as in it's the creator part of that God.
But we've smuggled in the illegitimate God the God who is the singularity that creates the first particle is something that physicists may one day understand, or maybe they won't. But it is clearly a dishonest playing with words to say that has anything remotely to do with the God who forgives sins, listens to prayers, gets born of a virgin, etc.
Okay, I mean, obviously, I understand what you're saying, that there's a lot more information there about this God, and you have great trouble understanding that. But that's that's an understatement. But I mean, ultimately, the fact is that I feel that if the universe exists, logically, it has to have a cause. Okay, and so from that point of view, why is God not a satisfactory cause?
You can define the cause as God if you wish, but it's a sheer verbal trick. By using the word God as opposed to using the word thunk or something, you made it look like the God that is a person, is an intelligence, and not, let alone a sin forgiver.
I mean, in a sense, that's what John Lennox was very arguing, was an intelligence because of the fine-tuning of the universe. That you used the anthropic principle to say, well, if we didn't exist in a universe of fine-tuning, we wouldn't even be able to perceive it and think about it and talk about it in this way. But ultimately, what that boils down to is some kind of belief in a multiverse theory, etc. I mean, isn't that, which there is absolutely no scientific evidence for, just as much a supposition as the supposition that God created the universe we live in? Isn't the multiverse theory
not when God is 3 in 1, when he was crucified on a cross, rose again on the third day? I mean, what gets me about you guys is you're so bloody confident about things you know. I'm saying we don't know.
No,
that's
absolutely.
the humble position.
I'm not trying to argue in this context for the Trinity, the Virgin Birth, and that kind of thing. I'm just trying to argue for the simpler idea of a creative a creator God, a supernatural, something outside the material world? Because that's what my mind leads
something
me
we
to.
don't understand. There's something we don't understand at the root of the universe. When you don't understand something, it's perfectly legitimate to give it a name. You can give it any name you like. But if you give it a name that already means something else, and if that leads you to draw conclusions, or leads other people to draw conclusions, then that is a dishonest use of words.
It's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.